Throughout history, there have been some wars that didn't just affect a few countries, but completely changed the course of humanity. Today, we're going to talk about one such conflict, World War II. This was a war that engulfed the entire globe in fire and blood. It wasn't just a clash of armies. It was a battle of ideas, a struggle for power, and a relentless drive for conquest. It's a story of immense tragedy, but also of incredible resilience, and it's a story we must never forget. So, let's dive into the history of the war that reshaped our world. World War II officially began in 1939, but the seeds of this global conflict were planted much earlier. In the aftermath of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles, which ended the First War, imposed harsh penalties on Germany, leading to economic hardship and national humiliation. This created a fertile ground for extremist ideologies to take root. The main catalyst, however, was a man named Adolf Hitler. He rose to power with a promise to restore Germany's former glory and believed it was Germany's destiny to become the most powerful nation in the world. He began rearming the country in direct violation of the treaty and started expanding German territory. The final straw came on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. This aggressive act of expansion could no longer be ignored. In response, Britain and France, who had pledged to protect Poland, declared war on Germany. This fateful decision marked the official beginning of the Second World War, a conflict that would last for 6 long years and involve countries from every corner of the planet. To understand World War II, you have to understand Adolf Hitler and the ideology of Nazi Germany. Hitler was the leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, more commonly known as the Nazi Party. At the core of his beliefs was a dangerous and hateful ideology of racial supremacy. He believed that the so-called Aryan or Germanic race was superior to all others. This twisted worldview led to the systematic persecution of anyone deemed inferior. Jewish people were the primary target of this hatred, but the Nazis also persecuted Romani people, Slavs, people with disabilities, political opponents, and many other groups. This persecution escalated into one of the most horrific atrocities in human history, the Holocaust. Millions of innocent men, women, and children were rounded up and imprisoned in concentration camps and death camps. In these camps, they faced starvation, forced labor, brutal violence, and ultimately, systematic murder in gas chambers. The scale of this genocide is almost unimaginable. Countless lives were extinguished, families were torn apart, and entire communities were wiped out. The Holocaust stands as a terrifying reminder of where unchecked hatred and prejudice can lead. As the war escalated, the world quickly became divided into 2 opposing military alliances. On one side were the Axis powers, a pact built on aggressive expansionism. The main members were Germany, led by Hitler, Italy under the fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, and the Empire of Japan, which had its own imperial ambitions in Asia and the Pacific. Together, they sought to dominate their respective spheres of influence and reshape the global order according to their own designs. On the other side stood the Allied powers. Initially, this alliance was led by Britain and France. They were later joined by a vast coalition of other nations who opposed the Axis aggression. A major turning point came in June 1941, when Germany invaded the Soviet Union, bringing the massive nation and its Red Army into the war on the side of the Allies. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan was continuing its own campaign of conquest, wreaking havoc across China and Southeast Asia. The United States had remained officially neutral, though it was providing aid to the Allies. That all changed on December 7, 1941. In a surprise attack, Japan launched a devastating assault on the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. This act brought the industrial and military might of the United States fully into the war, tipping the scales decisively in favor of the Allied powers and turning the European and Asian conflicts into a truly global war. World War II was without a doubt the deadliest and most destructive war in all of human history. The conflict was fought on an unprecedented scale, spanning multiple continents and oceans. It was a total war, meaning it didn't just involve soldiers on the battlefield. It impacted the lives of civilians in every warring nation. Cities were reduced to rubble by massive bombing campaigns. We saw the horrors of the Blitz in London, the firebombing of Dresden and Tokyo, and countless other urban centers leveled by what was known as carpet bombing. Entire regions were devastated, farmlands were destroyed, and economies were shattered. Millions of soldiers lost their lives on battlefields from the frozen steppes of Russia to the sweltering jungles of the Pacific Islands. But the civilian death toll was even higher. Millions of non-combatants perished due to bombings, massacres, disease, and starvation. The war was fought on land, with massive tank battles and brutal infantry combat. It was fought in the air, with dogfights between fighter planes and strategic bombing raids. And it was fought at sea, with naval battles that determined control of vital supply lines. The sheer scale of the destruction and the immense loss of human life is something that is difficult to fully comprehend even today. As the war in Europe was drawing to a close, the fight in the Pacific raged on with brutal intensity. The United States and its allies were advancing island by island towards Japan, but the cost in lives was enormous. American leaders feared that a full-scale invasion of the Japanese mainland would result in millions more casualties on both sides. It was in this context that a fateful decision was made. The United States had been secretly developing a new, terrifying weapon through the Manhattan Project, the atomic bomb. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber dropped the world's first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion was catastrophic, wiping out a huge part of the city in an instant. In a flash of light and a wave of heat, tens of thousands of people were killed immediately. Many more would die in the following days, weeks, and years from radiation sickness and injuries. 3 days later, on August 9th, with Japan still not surrendering, a second atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Nagasaki, causing similar devastation. This unprecedented use of nuclear weapons remains one of the most tragic and controversial events in modern history. Faced with this unimaginable destructive power and the Soviet Union's declaration of war, Japan finally announced its surrender on August 15, 1945. With the surrender of Japan, World War II finally came to an end. The war in Europe had concluded a few months earlier. After years of intense fighting, the Allied forces closed in on Germany from both the east and the west. The Soviet Red Army fought its way into Berlin in a brutal final battle. Facing certain defeat, with his capital in ruins and his 1,000-year empire crumbling around him, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his bunker on April 30, 1945. Just days later, on May 8, 1945, Germany formally surrendered. This day is now celebrated as Victory in Europe Day, or VE Day. The 6-year-long nightmare was finally over. The guns fell silent, But the world that emerged from the rubble was a world that had been changed forever. The joy of victory was mixed with the profound grief for the tens of millions who had been lost and the daunting task of rebuilding a shattered world. The aftermath of World War II reshaped the global landscape in profound ways. The old world order was gone. In an effort to prevent such a devastating conflict from ever happening again, world leaders came together in 1945 to establish the United Nations. Its primary goal was to foster international cooperation and maintain peace and security. The war also marked the end of Europe's dominance in world affairs. Two new superpowers emerged from the ashes, the United States and the Soviet Union. These two nations, with their opposing ideologies of capitalism and communism, would soon become locked in a new kind of conflict, the Cold War. This ideological struggle would dominate global politics for the next half-century, dividing the world into two competing blocs. The war also accelerated the end of colonialism, as weakened European powers could no longer maintain their vast overseas empires. But perhaps the most important lesson the world learned from this immense tragedy was the sheer futility and horror of war. It taught us that war is not a glorious adventure, but an engine of destruction that brings nothing but suffering and loss. The story of World War II is a somber one, but it's a story that we must continue to tell and to learn from. It serves as a powerful reminder that hatred, intolerance, greed, and the thirst for absolute power can lead humanity down a path of self-destruction. The sacrifices made by an entire generation should not be in vain. By remembering the past, we honor the memory of the millions who suffered and died, and we arm ourselves with the knowledge to build a better, more peaceful future. We learn the importance of diplomacy, understanding, and standing up against injustice wherever we see it. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through such a critical moment in history. If you found this video informative and meaningful, please give it a like, share it with others, and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the events that have shaped our world. Goodbye and take care.